Okay, so we start this first morning session with Bernard Derrida.
Tu me préviens, 5 minutes à l'avance.
I think it's okay.
Okay, so it's an honor to talk here on this 23rd meeting, Claude Dixon meeting, in honor of Cyrano. I have known them for very long. In fact, Cyrano is the first person I met here in Saclay. As a student, like François David was saying, we arrived and he was the head of the department, so we met him. But at that time, I had not really realized first how a good scientist, a very important and well-known scientist he was, and also how Saclay was an important place where so many very good scientists were working and where so many different subjects were studied. And it was really a great luck in my life, but I think many of us, to be able to work with people as famous as Cyrano and as Claude. In fact, Cyrano was the head, and one thing I remember, as it was said before, that he was always doing very, very long calculations, and as a young student, sometimes we needed him to sign a paper, and we had to wait that the calculation was more or less finished, so which means that we had to wait for some time before he had time to sign the papers. Claude had an office next to mine, and it was also a wonderful experience to have him close, because in the evening he would come with the ideas he had been working on during the day. And so I was exposed to really very interesting problems, and usually at this time in the morning he would come with new ideas, having thought during the night about the problem. So it was always very inspiring for people like me. Okay, so now let me come to my talk, and in fact here I am going to mention some work which I have been interested in for almost 30 years, and it started with work with Herbert Spohn, which was inspired by spin glasses in '88, so 30 years ago. Then it continued 10 years later with Éric Brunet, who was a student at École Normale. Then again, 10 years later, we worked with Stéphane Munier and Al Muller who were particle physicists, but it turned out that they were interested in this problem. And the most recent works, which I am going to talk about today, are 3 different aspects which were developed separately with Zhang Shi, who is a mathematician in Paris, Peter Motichaux from Edinburgh, and Éric Brunet and Julien Berestiki from the University of Oxford. So as many people here are not familiar with the problem of the Fisher-KPP equation, the first part will be somewhat introductory, and then I will mention our more recent results about the position of front branching Brownian motion and the question of directed polymer in the second part of my talk. So maybe there is a pointer. Okay, so the Fisher-KPP equation, it's an equation which was studied in, here I have a stick, that's okay. So, which appeared, in fact, both in the statistics literature in connection to genes and in the mathematical literature in 1937. And this is what it is, this equation. So it's a field which evolves according to this nonlinear equation. And in fact, the motivation for it is the following. Imagine that you have a population. Here, individuals are either blue or red, and somehow there is an advantageous gene, or you could think also as a disease, that a red and a blue, the blue might be contaminated by the red, so there is a reaction, these particles diffuse. For example, for simplicity, you could imagine that the total number of particles on each side is fixed. These particles diffuse, and there is a reaction that the red plus the blue might give 2 reds. So the red will spread as a function of time. And And so after a while, the red will start to invade the blue region. And if you try to write a kind of mean field equation for the density of red, then you find that there is a reaction term due to this event, which is u minus u squared. And if in addition you have some diffusion, you end up with this simple Fisher KPP equation. And in fact, it has been studied and is still studied in lots of details over the last 80 years. So, as I said, you can interpret it as a problem of reaction diffusion, and if you try to integrate, for example, numerically the equations, then after a while you see a shape like this for the density of red, and this shape, this front will move, and then all the question is, what is the solution in the long time asymptotics? But the problem reappeared also many years after in connection to the branching Brownian motion, so I will explain why. And also, as I said, 30 years ago, we also saw that it's related to a problem of disorder, at least a mean field problem of disorder, which is a problem of directed polymers on the tree. So I will try to explain that later in this talk. Now, if you start with this equation and you try to integrate it, you start with everything red on the left and everything blue on the right. Then after a while, you see a solution of this kind. And in fact, what you see is that the solution becomes a front which is moving at a certain velocity. And then you would like to understand what is the velocity of this front and where is it located after a certain time t, especially in the long time limit. Now, one thing which is very easy to do, or rather easy to do, is to say, let's try to find solutions which are moving at a certain velocity, keeping the same shape. So if you try to inject a solution of this kind into the equation, you find that the W is the shape is a solution of this equation, so just by replacing it here. And then still this is a nonlinear differential equation, and although most of the time you don't have an explicit solution of it, you can convince yourself very easily by a mechanical analog that there is a whole family of solutions. That is, if you choose an arbitrary velocity v, you can find a solution. And the way to see it is rather simple. If you just think of this equation in a different context. So let me just replace W by a coordinate and the x variable by a time. Then this equation is exactly the same as a problem of a single particle. This would be the acceleration of a particle in a potential u. The potential would have this shape, and v, the velocity of the front, becomes a friction term. So the problem you have to solve is a very simple mechanical problem. You have a particle going down this potential with a certain friction. And then you can really understand very well that if you have, for example, a rather large friction, then the particle will go down and then will stop here. And so essentially for any friction, you can find a solution. Now, all these frictions are not acceptable, because what happens is that if the friction is too small, the particle will go down and go up and come back. And it means in terms of the front solution that the shape of the front would get some negative values, which means you would have negative densities, and this is not possible. So in fact, when you try to study this simple mechanical problem, you find that there is a minimal velocity, and if this velocity, if you go to lower velocities, the mechanical system will try to oscillate, will start to oscillate, and then you would get a solution that you cannot accept. Okay, so now the whole problem, which has also been understood long ago, is what is the selection mechanism? That is, because you have all this family of traveling wave, which is the traveling wave that the system will choose if you go, if you start with a given initial condition. And okay, the point is that what is very important in this kind of problem is the shape of the initial condition towards in the region where U is very small. And in fact, you get a very simple relation between the decay of the shape of the front or of the initial condition and the velocity. You see, if you just take U to be very small, you put it here, then U squared can be neglected, then you find a relation between the velocity and the decay. And the outcome of this works by Kolmogorov, Petrovsky, Piskunov, and Fischer is the following, which maybe is not that intuitive, is that if the decay of the solution is small enough, then the velocity, asymptotic velocity, will be just given by this V of gamma. So if there is a certain gamma in the initial condition, and the decay is small enough, then you get V of gamma. But if it's larger than a critical value, which corresponds to the minimal velocity, then the front will move at this minimal velocity. So somehow there is a phase transition in the initial condition, and we will see later that this phase transition is exactly the same as a glass phase transition and has some of the properties of the Parisi solution. When you just take this equation, you look at this equation in the context of directed polymer. Okay, so what I have said is not particular to this FKPP equations, but you could have over non-linearities, you could have discrete time, discrete space, and so on. And essentially, the story is always the same. You have a velocity V of gamma, and if the decay of the initial condition is slow enough, then the asymptotic front will move at the velocity V of gamma. If it is, if the initial condition is steep enough, then you will move at the minimal velocity. Now, once you know which velocity the system will go, then the question is, what is the position of the front? So you take this initial condition, you let it evolve, and then in the long time limit, what I said is that there is this asymptotic velocity, and if the initial condition is steep enough, you move at this minimal velocity. Now, in 1978, Bramson, who is a mathematician, was able to determine this next correction, which is 3/2 over gamma c times log t. So there is the position gets some logarithmic correction, and in fact, this 3/2 appears in many other contexts, for example, in Gaussian free field, and this is some very recent works where people have realized that the two problems are very related. And then 20 years later, there is a correction here, which was proposed by Eber and von Sarlos, which also seems to be explicit and which is somehow universal. So somehow what you see is that the position of the front in the long time limit contains some terms, and the point is that these terms are universal. That is, if you change the nonlinearities, you will always get this term, and if you change the model, maybe the function V of gamma will change, but the coefficients which are here will always be the same. And so we try to understand that and to see what is the universality class. And so this is some simple models that we have looked at with Eric Brunet. And so this is a work that we have done in 2010. And so we tried to look at the same kind of problem as the FKPP equation, but we looked at a simple linear system where the only nonlinearity is due to saturation. So you have on each side, you have a certain U, and this U evolves according to linear equations, and then when U reaches 1, it remains at 1. So you start, for example, with a steep initial condition, and you let evolve, and you ask, where is the position of this front after some time? Now, technically, it looks very easy because at each stage, we have only to solve linear equations. The problem is that all these linear equations have to match. You see, you have different sectors, you have to match them, and it looks a little complicated. And so let me just go quickly about what we have done. And this is a little bit complicated formula, and I won't use it. We will come to something much simpler very soon. But this relates the initial condition here to the time Tn where the front reaches position n. So somehow we can, so we can relate that. This means this is a series expansion. So you expand in powers of lambda, and this gives you all the times Tn. If you try to write it Tn in terms of the initial condition, the formulas are totally unusable. But to our surprise, looking at this linear problem, we could determine just from this equation all this asymptotic series, Tn as a function of n. So if you try to invert it, it exactly corresponds to what had been done before. Now, okay, this looks a little complicated, so more recently we tried to look at even a simpler problem, which is the following. This evolution equation, so this is just the continuum version of the problem, and we ask, you start with some initial condition, for example, which is a step, and we ask what is the position of the front. So this is a linear equation, there is just a saturation. When u reaches 1, it stays at 1. So what is the position of the front? And the equivalent of the formula I have just written before is this one. So we have to determine xt, solution of this equation. For example, if we take a steep initial condition, we have to determine xt such that this equation is satisfied for all values of r. So it's not a single equation, so it determines the xt. And to our surprise, the analysis of this equation gives us exactly the 3/2 of Bramson, the Hebert-Van Sarlos term. Even we can predict another term here, and there is a whole sequence of universal terms which come out just from this equation. So really try to extract the asymptotics of xt from this equation, which is valid for all r. So to give just a feeling about it, so this is the result, and this is the equation. Now, let's take the beginning of this expansion. Let's just replace xt by 2t and forget everything else. Now, if we do that, of course, the calculation is very easy. You put it in the equation here. If xt is 2t, you can do the integral, and you find that the integral is divergent at r equal 1. So it's singular. It's not 1. It's divergent. Now, if you add the logarithmic term, essentially what you do is that you kill the leading singularity and you get a weaker one. And then this is exactly the mechanism. So if you add the logarithm, then you get a singularity here. And just for lambda equals 3/2, then you get rid of the singularity. It tells you what the 3/2 is. And then you continue like that. And then you end up with this sequence of universal terms. You have a weaker and weaker singularity, and in order to remove it, you have to add this asymptotics. But I find it, you see, having been in Saclay for several years, okay, I like problems where you have a very simple posed problem, and then you can extract some unexpected asymptotics. Okay, so now let me come to another problem, which is related to the Fisher-KPP equation, which is the branching Brownian motion. Now, the Brownian motion, I believe everybody knows what it is. Here it's a position on the horizontal axis is time. So you have a particle in Brownian motion is moving like this. And branching Brownian motion is that the particle splits at a certain rate. So it splits somewhere here, and then you have two branching Brownian motion. Each part splits and so on. And this is the branching Brownian motion. And typically the number of particles after time t grows like exponential t. Now, the question people have been interested in fact, starting with McKean, is to ask where is the rightmost particle? So what is the probability that the rightmost particle is at a certain position? Now, this is a well-known question, something which has been understood for very long. So one way to formulate it, here I just tell how the Brownian motion is normalized. So during a very small time interval dt, then the variance of the displacement is given by 2 dt. 2 is convenient normalization, but it's not important. And they split at rate 1. And now if you ask, what is the probability that the particle is at the left, the rightmost particle is at the left of x, then it's rather easy to show. I just can that it evolves according to this equation, because this can be understood very easily. If you think of time t plus dt, you separate the very short, the beginning dt, because during the first time interval dt, ever the particle splits, then you have q squared, because both branches have to be less than x, or it does not split, but it moves a little bit, and then you have 1 minus dt, this is the displacement, delta x is small, you expand, and you get the Fisher-KPP equation. So I go very fast, but essentially the probability that the particle is at the left of x is solution of the FKPP equation, maybe up to a very simple change of variable. Okay, so essentially what we know from the work of Bramson is that you have this branching Brownian motion. This is after a certain time t, and what Bramson tells us, and in fact it is something, is proof is based on probabilistic ideas. It tells us, as I said before, that after a long time t, the position of the rightmost particle will be at position 2t minus the 3/2 log t, and plus all these terms that we discussed. And the way that Bramson does it, okay, and in fact, this 3/2 here is not too easy to get. Just if you would do a very naive calculation, the naive calculation would be to say the total number of points is exponential t. Each point, each path is doing a Brownian motion like this. So you have a Gaussian, and you would say, where do I find the rightmost particle, by saying that essentially this is of order 1. And this would give the 1/2 here instead of Bramson's 3/2. So you have to do something more. And if I just try to summarize the idea of Bramson, in fact, after a very long time, this branching Brownian motion looks a little bit like this triangle, you see, if you wait long enough. And the idea of Bramson is that the particle which will dominate in the long time limit, which will be the leader here, has a trajectory which is like this, but which is forced to remain in this triangle. So it's not, it's a Brownian motion, but the Brownian motion is not allowed to go outside this rectangle. And when you use these properties, then you get the 3/2 that Bramson got. Okay. Now, recently, we have been interested in the large deviation of this problem, and part of the question of large deviations was known long before, and then we looked at it and we found some new results. So the aspect which was known long ago was due to two mathematicians, in fact they are French, Chauvin and Rouault, and instead of asking where is the rightmost particle, you ask what is the probability that the rightmost particle is at a certain position. Now you have two situations. Maybe you ask that there is a large positive deviation, that the rightmost particle is to the right of where it should be, or you could ask it is to the left. Now, if it is to the right, essentially you get this kind of expression, which is rather easy to understand. You see, if you just forget the story about the 1/2 or the 3/2, essentially it would be what you would get if the paths would be independent Brownian motion and you would have exponential T of them. So that's somehow easy, although to prove it mathematically it's a little more difficult. So up to a prefactor is the same as independent Brownian motion. Is V equals 2 is normal. Okay, now what we looked at with Zanchi, so with a mathematician in Paris, is that we tried to look at negative deviation. What is the probability that the rightmost is on the left of V equal 2? So this means that, you see, if you start with some initial condition like this, you have a front moving like that, and we are asking what is the asymptotic there. So it looks maybe not so interesting, but it turns out that there is a phase transition and there are some maybe non-trivial exponents in this theory. And so, in fact, the first thing is you have to understand what are the events which are producing these negative deviations. And the events are the following. You want the rightmost to be far to the left. So what the system does is that for a while it moves to the left without branching, because if it branches after that it's very difficult to push the particles to the left. So for a fraction of the time it does this, and after that it branches in a normal way. And so when you take that into account, you find that the solution of the FKPP equation, in fact, you have a new critical velocity which appears, which is which is explicitly given by that. And on one side, the probability that the rightmost particle is at the left of x is given by this expression. On the other side, it's given by that expression. And it's a little funny that you have even some prefactor, which is an exponent, which is not so trivial. So this is what we have been able to do. The analysis is not too difficult starting from the FKPP equation, but to prove it, you need to be a little careful. Okay, so these are some results about the large deviation function. Now let me come to a third aspect of the FKPP equation, which is a directed polymer. And okay, I think several other speakers here will talk. Victor Dotsenko and Peter Motisho also will talk about directed polymer. So this is a simple model of disorder, which in fact was introduced in the 80s. It belongs to the, it's described by the Kardar-Parisi-Zhang equation, and many people were interested in this problem. And our interest was that it shares the properties of spin glasses with a broken symmetry of replica in the mean field version, and although it's much simpler. So the problem is the following. If you work in 1 + 1 dimension, you have a lattice here, and then a directed path is a path which goes from the top down. Okay, this is a directed path, and by definition of the path, the energy of a path is just the sum of the energies which are of the bonds which are visited by the path. So the lattice is disordered. Each side or each bond on the lattice has some random number, and then each path has an energy, just the number of bonds which are visited, and then you want to do the statistical physics of that. So imagine, for example, that you want to build a road or something, and then when you buy land where the road will cross somewhere, you have to pay a certain price, and then you want to find the minimal cost, for example, for the road that you want to build. Okay, this is a problem which has been studied over the last 30 years, and still many things are unknown, although there has been a lot of progress in 1 + 1 dimension in the last 10 or 15 years. I think Victor will present, I'm sure, some very recent beautiful results that he has obtained. But for example, in 2 + 1 dimension, even the exponents are not known. And 30 years ago, with Herbert Spohn, we looked at the mean field the mean field version of this problem. So we looked at the problem on a tree. Now, how is it related to the FKPP equation? Now, if instead of taking a regular tree, okay, you can do it on a regular tree, you would get not the FKPP equation, but one of these extensions. But if you really want to stick to the FKPP equation, you just replace by the tree by just this branching Brownian motion, and then you consider that each of the endpoints is one configuration of the system. So xi of t is the position of the ith endpoint here, and then the partition function would be given by this. And it's very elementary to show that a generating function of the partition function satisfies the FKPP equation. You just look again at what happens during a very short time interval dt. During time dt, there is a small contribution from the top to the energy, which is here, or there is the branching Brownian motion will split into two parts, and so very quickly you can show that this generating function of the partition function satisfies this equation, which is the FKPP. And somehow, surprisingly, the only place where the temperature is, you see there is no beta, there is no temperature here, the only place is in the initial condition. And you remember that we saw earlier that depending on the decay of the initial condition, you have one velocity, you have the minimal velocity, or another one, and this is a phase transition which here corresponds to a glassy phase transition. So the same thing that I discussed earlier just immediately tells you that if the temperature is high enough, then log of zt, the free energy, is given by this expression, so it varies with beta, and then above a certain, below a certain temperature, then you are in a frozen phase, and it's exactly the same thing that we saw for the position of the front in the FKPP equation. Now, because this is a disordered system, so we learned since the work of Giorgio Parisi in particular and many others, that one quantity to look at is the P of Q, the distribution of overlap for this problem, which is just defined as this way, where Qij is just how much, what is the fraction of time, if you have two endpoints here, what is the fraction of time that the two endpoints have spent together. So this is just the natural overlap for this problem. And it turns out that, okay, this has been known for very long, that if you are in the low temperature phase, this P of Q consists of two delta functions here, where mu, in fact, turns out here to be beta c over beta, so it's something less than 1. So it's a one-step broken symmetry of replica. And the result that we have obtained with Peter Motichau, who is here, and we will present generalization of these things also, is that for large time we can get the correction to these two delta peaks, and we get that the P of Q, so this means that how the one-step broken symmetry of replica is moved by finite size effect. And we found some explicit formula which is like this, and again, which seems to be universal. That is, you have a q minus 1 minus q to the 3/2 here, and the dependence on the v is explicit. So we believe that this formula is valid for the general case, and it's slightly modified for when you are exactly at the phase transition. So somehow the first order, the one-step broken symmetry of replica becomes somehow a full broken symmetry of replica when the time is not infinite, but when you look at the first finite size correction. So this is a result that we have obtained and published a year ago. And to understand it, essentially with words, I come back to this branching Brownian motion here. So this is a branching Brownian motion. If you look at it over a longer time, it looks like this. And essentially, this is due to this kind of event. You see, I said that, you see, in the low temperature phase, everything is dominated by the points which are near the maximum. And so this is typical trajectory of the leader at time t. But there are some events where the leader did the following, that it came back close to here and before it reaches. And these are the events which dominate and which produce this full broken symmetry of replica, or these corrections that we have been able to calculate. Now, I don't know how much time I am very close to the end.
No, about 5-10 minutes.
Okay. So let me. So somehow, you see, we have this P of Q that we can compute. Let me just say that to compute the P of Q in the thermodynamic limit, the leading one, it's rather easy. It's extremely easy. I think it's probably one of the simplest cases where you can use the replica. And you do the following. You look at the partition function. Usually with replica, you want to calculate the free energy by taking a n goes to 0 limit. And then the only thing you have to do is to say, I have n replicas, then I group them into n over mu groups of mu replicas. So in principle, when n is an integer, n would be an integer, the number of groups would be an integer, mu should be an integer, but following Giorgio Parisi, then we forget that all these things are integers, so we consider them as real. Instead of taking a maximum, we take a minimum. That's the usual trick. And so if you do that, the only thing you have to do is to find the maximum or the extremum over mu of this function. So you do it, and this gives you the P of Q. And now the question, which I think is a very interesting open question, is it possible by doing some kind of analysis of the fluctuation around the saddle point to recover our finite size correction? And I think that's a question that we have tried to understand with Peter, and we have an explicit answer for the first finite size correction, but we don't know at all how to get it by replica. And so probably here it's the right audience to ask if anyone has a good idea for that. Now, let me just come with open questions, which have all to do with replicas. So you remember I talked about the position of the front. So in terms of the directed polymer problem, it means that the free energy in the low temperature phase, okay, maybe I have forgotten the beta in front, so it would be maybe 1 over beta, is 2t minus the 3/2 log t. Now this 3/2 log t, is there a way that replica can predict it? And the answer is we don't know. And of course, if it can predict it, I tried to convince you that there are other universal corrections. Okay, is there a way to expand around the saddle point and then to get these corrections? I think it's an interesting question. The other thing I mentioned is about the large deviation function, and I said that in the long time limit, in fact, there are two regimes. So you see, it is in the tail of the solution, so it looks in a place where there is nothing interesting, but in fact, there is this change of behavior. And so is there, again, a way by replica to understand these things? And the same question about the result that we have obtained with Peter about the correction of P of Q. And now, just in the last 2 minutes, I want to mention, in fact, some much more difficult aspect of the problem that we have been looking at for many years. And if you start with the microscopic model I started with, then you have particles which diffuse, the red and the blues and so on. And this KPP equation, which is here, is a kind of mean field equation. Now, if you really you want to describe more precisely the problem, you need to go to the noisy version of it, which is here. And this noisy version has been something on which we have been working for very long, and we obtained some results with Al Muller and Stéphane Munier about 10 years ago, and I just don't want to go into the details of what we did, but let me just say that one thing that we obtained was that the velocity of the front, due to the noise, gets some corrections here. And we could predict this in a work with Brunet in 97, then with our high energy colleagues, we predicted this. And in fact, some mathematicians, now there are several proofs, so far they can tell that this is correct. But whatever these results are, they are universal. That is, if you change the equations, then essentially there will be some gamma of C here, or V prime or V double prime of gamma of C, there in a way that we can tell. But somehow the 1 over log squared, the log n over log cube, they are universal. And the question is that, is there a way to understand it? And this is, I think, an open question. You have a theory, but somehow what we think, okay, I skip that, but what seems, you see, what is tempting to do would be just to see whether these universal corrections could be understood by some kind of renormalization group for the FKPP equations, with noise or without noise, whether the replica approach will be able to predict also all these corrections, and how can one think of these finite size corrections within the replica approach, as you see by looking at the quadratic form of quadratic form in the replica space? I don't know. I think these questions are very simple to ask, but so far we did not succeed to solve them, so they are open. And here I just want to mention some of the works on which this talk has been based. So let me finish now.
Thank you. Questions?
I wondered how much is it robust, the universality, if you have these branching processes in which the random walks can also die, but at a rate in which the average number of walks is still exponential, and you condition on the fact that they didn't die.
I would believe that as long as the growth is exponential, I would believe that it's the same. The point is that technically, if you start to do a theory, if it can die, that there is a probability that the partition function is strictly zero. So when you try to talk about log z, you might have some trouble. You have to be a little careful, but otherwise, I think the result would be the same.
Other questions?
Am I right to suppose that the stochastic equation is the Ito one?
I think probably it does not matter. That is, there is always this thing that in the weak noise limit, the Ito, okay, so I think the Ito and Strotonovich, to leading orders, they don't matter. So okay, I believe it's not the problem, but maybe I overlooked that. So.
Other questions? Okay, so if not, let's thank Bernard again.